Hi, it's Miss Parrott, and this video is about the carbon cycle. Carbon is the most important element for building the molecules essential for living things, like carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids like DNA and RNA, and proteins. Just like all nutrient cycles, carbon moves from the abiotic environment, is incorporated into living things, moves through the community of living things, and then becomes once again part of the environment, the abiotic environment, and it's a constant cycle through. There are two carbon cycles, short-term and long-term. This shows us the short-term. In this case, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is trapped in producers by the process of photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, we take 6H2O plus, there's that carbon, 6CO2, and we're going to trap the light energy in using our friend chlorophyll, which is found in the chloroplast of green plants, to absorb that energy, fuse those things together to produce the carbon compound glucose, C6H12O6, and have oxygen as a waste product, so 6 oxygen molecules. And you see here that in this process, we are taking the energy, the light energy from the sun, and through this chemical reaction, putting that energy into potential chemical energy. Now we have these carbon compounds in producers. Those are going to be eaten by consumers and go all the way through the food chain. The carbon, some of it is actually going to build our actual consumers. So to build the carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins of the consumers. And then some of that carbon is being respired. And respiration happens from all living things. And respiration is just the breakdown of glucose in the presence of oxygen, and it will release CO2 and H2O. So we can see the carbon here moving from this complex molecule. We break it apart, and now we have 6 carbon dioxides. But it's important to note that during this process, the stored energy from the glucose, that energy is actually used, so as we break glucose apart, the energy is being used to put 2 other molecules together. So we have a molecule called ADP, adenosine diphosphate, so di is 2. So you've got this thing called adenosine, and it has 2 little phosphate groups sticking to it. Then we're going to add an inorganic phosphate, so that's just a phosphate that's chilling by itself. So the energy from the breaking of this glucose is actually going to stick ADP, diphosphate, to one individual phosphate. So that's 2 plus 1 is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is an energy molecule that we can actually use in our bodies. So it's important to know that we respire, our carbon is moving back into the abiotic environment, and we're shifting the energy out of glucose and into ATP. Now, one thing that happens if we run out of ATP and we don't have any glucose is death. So, all living things die, and once they do, decomposition begins. We've got detritivores that will eat some of this dead stuff. We also have decomposers like bacteria and fungi that will secrete enzymes to break down the dead things, and some of those nutrients will be absorbed. So the carbon that's absorbed by these decomposers will be part of making new decomposers, but decomposers also respire, so any of the carbon that they took in, they may respire out as well. It's also important to note that animals and some bacteria release methane as a byproduct of digestion. And so methane is CH4, so that's another carbon compound that is released into the atmosphere by living things. That was the short-term carbon cycle, and this is the long-term carbon cycle. This process takes millions of years to complete. And so, but similarly, we're taking carbon dioxide out of the air through photosynthesis. So our light energy is putting CO2 and H2O together. These are some algae in a pond, right? Algae are producers as well. And then after these die, and over lots and lots of time, layers of sediment will build up and build up over them. And the pressure of that and the heat that's down lower in the Earth's crust will go deeper and deeper. So after a lot of heat and pressure and time, and when I talk time, I'm meaning millions of years, these former algae and small little plant and plant-like things form fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. Natural gas is also called methane, which we just saw before. Once we have these, we, human beings, these days have learned to pump these fossil fuels out and burn them for our own purposes. So we burn it to get the energy out of it. And when we burn it, that process is called combustion. Combustion has a very similar equation as respiration does. But we take a hydrocarbon just like methane, so we've got CH4 in this example. Your hydrocarbon plus oxygen, combustion happens and it breaks apart into CO2 and H2O, and then energy, right? And some of that energy is going to be released as heat, and some of it we've got like a car here, some of that energy is going to turn into kinetic energy to push the car forward. So what I think is really cool is that the sunlight that was trapped during photosynthesis and the CO2 that was trapped millions of years ago, that's the same energy that is being used to make your car go millions of years later today. And that's the carbon cycle.